Next presenter is Akin. He is a software engineer in London, having studied medicine in a past life. Currently working with TypeScript and Node.js. Vim fantastic, fantastic, fan, excuse me, Vim fanatic using Vim for all my editing needs. Collaborator on OniVim, a project aimed at breaking Vim free of terminal limitations. The title is the GUI-fication of Neovim. Please start.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So my talk's going to be the GUI-fication of Neovim. Apologies to the translator. I fully made up that word. There's no such thing. But it's just to describe the idea of putting Neovim inside of a GUI wrapper. And I'm going to talk to you about how myself and some others have done that. Okay, so just a little bit about me, as we all do. My name is Akin. I work as a software developer at a company called Monzo in London. My GitHub handle is Akin909. My Twitter, which I don't really use that much, but a bit, is Akin. So if anyone wants to tweet me. Cool. So this is the team. I just want a big shout out to the people on there. Obviously, it's Chops, so that's great. So top there's Brian, who's the maintainer and the original sort of conceiver of Neovim, as well as Ryan, Manuel, Tal, and at the bottom there's supposed to be me, but you can see me, so you're fine. Just wanted to shout out to these guys because I never get the chance to tell them. Right, so talking points are going to be talking about what is Oni, Oni's architecture a little bit, because that might be interesting, the extensibility we plan for Oni, where we are now, and where we want to see Oni go in the future. Okay, so first I'm going to explain what Oni is. So Oni is a GUI, so it's a graphical user interface for Neovim. So typically, Neovim and Vim have been sort of terminal applications, and they do an amazing job. I think there's nothing else like it, personally. It's my editor of choice. But living inside of the terminal comes with certain limitations in terms of what you can do in terms of the UI and the UX of the application. So what Oni tries to do is keep all of the true functionality of Neovim, your ability to use your plugins, that we've talked about plugins quite a lot, your mappings, everything that you've developed up to this point, but inside of a nicer GUI shell. So the difference between this and something like Atom or VS Code and their sort of like Vim-like bindings and plugging things is this is just Neovim that we render inside of a GUI application. So you do everything as you would normally with Neovim. We don't compromise on that. Okay, so, but more than just kind of giving you a nicer shell to Neovim, what we want to do as well is we want to give Neovim the ability to do things that just a text editor is unable to do currently. So things like advanced syntax highlighting and integration with language servers. So just a quick example here is some syntax highlighting that I did there. The theme's called Night Owl, actually, if anyone's interested. But the idea is that you can do sort of slightly more nuanced highlighting. I don't know if anyone happens to write React or anything like that, but rather than just identifying those as sort of like XML tags, it can actually pick up the fact that those are React components and highlights those differently. I guess if there are other things on the page, you'd see that it was actually differentiating. So this actually is us using a text-made syntax highlighter. We've borrowed this one from the VS Code open source syntax highlighter, but it's all out there, so we can use it. And so we sort of pass the text and tell Neovim how to highlight it, and then render all of it. Another little example here is, so this is the language server features. So this is an example of me editing Neovim, Oni, and just like making a mistake, having the language server tell us it's wrong, show us a little message, and then kind of correct it once that's done. Okay, so quick one now would be to talk about the architecture of Oni. So Oni is an Electron app. That's kind of like a very big issue. A lot of people have a lot of opinions about that. But it's currently written with React and TypeScript, which are technologies that I use in my day-to-day work. And it communicates with Neovim via its message pack API. What it sort of means, I mean, I guess from a sort of just a Vim point of view, if you're not familiar with it, is Neovim gives us the ability to to kind of operate it remotely, you might say. So we can make calls like API calls to Neovim to say, tell us what's in the buffer, or put this line in the buffer. So Neovim is sort of the engine, and we just control, so say the body of the car, right? And how that's all kind of rendered. So the actual content is rendered with WebGL and Canvas. We've recently switched it over to WebGL, actually, because it's like highly performant. I mean, VS Code is still running a Canvas render, as far as I know, as is Atom. Meanwhile, we've managed to get ours over to WebGL, which is thanks to Manuel's amazing work on that. So where are we now? Some of the stuff that we've done, we talked a little bit about the syntax highlighting. We've also implemented a file explorer. So in working on this, we wanted it to be as true to life as possible. So we wanted this to keep as many Vim bindings as possible. So what it does is you navigate it with HJKL, enter. It has a little bit of an undo tree, so you can kind of interact with things, yank files, paste them. I'll show you in a second. We also added some achievements. So this is primarily Brian's work here in wanting to get more people into Vim by making it approachable. So there's actually some tutorial functionality that users can go through different tutorials, teaches them a little bit about how to use Vim. And because we're using Electron, one thing that we do get for free is we can actually open a browser very easily as a split in the editor. So you can sort of run your local host right beside your actual code. Right. So I said to Brian this morning that I wasn't going to do this because it's a new computer and I didn't want to mess this all up. But I thought it would just be nicer to actually just show you rather than sort of like have all this stuff just described. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and mirror this, and if anyone does want to see it afterwards, I've got a couple of slides in here to show it, but there is that. I was going to kind of show you a little bit of some of the plugins, but what I'm going to do actually just is run through a little bit of what the API looks like for how we plan, how it's currently being extended and how it can continue to be extended. So a lot of this is dependent on you kind of understanding a bit of JavaScript. I apologize if it's sort of obscure, but I put some comments in to sort of make it make sense. Basically, a plugin is essentially just a function. It's an activate function you pass in. So say you created an empty repo, you create a plugin.js file, you create this function and you specify that in there. It would be an activate function. And Oni will pick up each activate function that's exported from whatever is specified as the entry file. And we pass in an exposed portion of Oni. So not only does Oni sort of like, do we wrap the GUI layer so you can say create menus or create windows, you can also actually communicate with Neovim. So you can have developers who may not be that familiar with writing things or commands for Neovim. They could actually just specify that by going through the Oni API. So this is a very, very tiny one. This is how we render the GitHub status icon. Basically, we specify a little element there, which is basically just a div, because it's running in a browser, essentially. The command there is just to open our repo. So we've actually got this in the bottom corner of the editor, and you click on that, and that will just open up the repo in your browser. Sorry. So here are some other plugins. I was going to demo these to you. Unfortunately, that didn't quite work. I don't know if you can see that there. What it does is it's basically just a file, and on top of that, we've got some VCS integration. So that's version control. So we've got Git there. So on each line, we basically just query Git to figure out who's done what on which particular line, and then render that on the side of each line. So things like this, based on the API we have right now, are fairly straightforward to do. So you can actually add so much extensibility. This was me just having seen that in VS Code, and I thought this would be cool. So it's actually quite easy to build on top of. This is another one which Brian's done, which is essentially, underneath there is just a binary image file, the PNG, but on top of that, we actually just render, we call them layers. They're literally just like an element on top of the actual file. So if you imagine that the actual buffer is WebGL, on top of that, you've literally just got an element, and we just render an image. And here's another one. I used to work a lot with CSV files on my old job, and I found it really, really, really frustrating to try and understand what the heck was going on. So I just found a library that actually just renders this sort of thing properly. And this is a JavaScript library. If anyone knows the ecosystem, there's 1,000,001 things out there. You can plug the data in there. and just get a React component that renders this sort of stuff quite nicely. Right. Okay, so one of the biggest issues or things that come up very often, especially on sort of Reddit and things like that, is performance. And one of the big reasons why a lot of people love Vim is the portability of Vim, the performance of Vim in terms of it being very quick and snappy. And so the trade-off that we have had to sort of face or think a lot about has been using Electron. I think VS Code do an amazing job with Electron because it's still quite fast, but we feel like it could be better, and definitely our use of it could definitely be optimized. So we're down the path of having to optimize Electron, or we've been thinking a lot about it, and we think that maybe there's perhaps been potentially been too many trade-offs. So if anyone's familiar with the project at all, you may not have heard of it before, but what we're thinking of doing is prototyping let's call it like a re-implementation of sorts. So a lot of these things are based on, so Atom VS Code are based on Electron, which is it gives up a lot. And so we're looking at whether or not we could use ReasonML, which is basically a syntax on top of OCaml, to write a simple desktop application framework, which Brian started prototyping, which is called Reverie. And this is going to, I think, be the platform that we start to look at maybe re-implementing Oni. I mean, we're still going to be maintaining the main project. The main project is what has brought us a lot of sort of interest and what people have looked at. But we kind of want to see if it's possible to go down this sort of slightly faster route. Here's just a quick sketch that Brian's come up with of what we wanted, how we wanted Reverie to work. So a very key thing is like a lot of the value of stuff like VS Code is in it's extensions, basically. There's an extension for everything. VS Code comes in as a text editor. 5 minutes later, with a couple of plugins, much like Vim, to be honest, you've got something that's pretty much an IDE. And so that's kind of what we want to kind of hook into that, because a lot of those things are open source. So if our API is compatible, we can just use that as well as our existing plugin API, which is a plugin, sort of community, which is fairly small. So we'd be planning on trying to communicate directly with Neovim, which is and Vim there. Brian's been looking into that quite a lot, and have everything sort of running natively, more or less, as opposed to running sort of through Electron and then eventually to C. So here are some links to our website, to the repo, if anyone's interested in that. We've got a Discord channel. We've got loads of people come on there and talk to us about the project. And there's a link to like Reverie, which is the framework we're trying out for rebuilding this, and a quick start for that. Questions?
Okay, if you have any question.
Sure.
Yeah, this is very exciting. Can you hear me?
Yeah, well, I'm super close. I know a lot of people in the back.
Well, so when you were talking about performance, have you seen Microsoft has done a lot of work to, no, it's not. Okay. So Microsoft has done a lot of work to improve performance on Visual Studio Code, which is based also on Electron. And they have a really extensive blog with tricks that they employed. I was wondering if you know about this and you did the same things they did?
Yeah, so short answer to that in terms of the tricks that they've been using. I actually don't use VS Code, but I spent a lot of time reading through their repo and looking a lot at some of what you described. I think part of where we're at right now is that they have to do a lot of stuff to try and make it work right, if that makes sense. It's like they've started off from a I don't want to say a bad place, but it's not the most performant place, and then they're doing a lot of stuff to try and get it to be performant. We're looking at potentially starting off from an area where we've got some room to actually so we don't have to kind of go, ooh, maybe we write this as some obscure format somehow, or we do these tricks here and there to get this 100 milliseconds faster. Maybe we can just start fast and then go from there. But it's an experiment, so we'll see where we go.
Thank you for your answer. Thank you.
No worries.
Any other question? While waiting for a question, Can you prepare trying demo again?
Yeah, sure.
質問は日本語でも大丈夫です。
There we are.
Yeah, you still have 12 minutes, so you can demo.
Doing like a very bizarre thing here. Sorry, I got the wrong.
Let's see if I can get it to change the orientation. Is it this? Let's just do mirror.
Sorry, I'm trying to get it to. Any Linux users out here? I've been told that it was super easy to switch to, but I'm having these endless issues there. Yeah, I'm trying to mirror, so I'm mirroring here.
And make sure both resolutions are same.
Let's
HD.
try this.
It's asking, keep changes, keep changes.
Let's try. Okay.
Okay.
That's much nicer. Cool. Right. So this is landing page for Oni. And down there we've got, so I've actually gone into the Oni repo, which is where I was going to show you. We've got our branch, which is master, and additions and changes. Got our mode indicator there. So what I'm going to do is, Brian's added quite a useful thing, which is input. It shows my input. So you can now see HJKL is how I move about there, even though this is actually just a layer on top of Vim. What we're going to do is we're going to open the Neovim editor. So this is actually the file that kind of represents our connection to Neovim. So if you see already, we've got quite different. So this is actually just Neovim. We're highlighting it differently by telling Neovim, rather than depending on it for highlighting, we tell it based on speaking to TextMate, which is what VS Code used for highlighting how to be highlighted. So there's a quick example of some of the language server integration. So there is, so this is all TypeScript, if anyone's familiar with that. It tells you this is it. It tells you the arguments that this function takes. The line underneath means that you can actually go to the definition of that. So we can just go to def. So there we go, screen with definitions over there. So that's one small thing. Another thing I guess I could show you is, so here's the file explorer I was talking about. So this is sort of the only repo. And if I decided, say I want to move lib, right, and main, for some bizarre reason, I think they should be in images. So I pop them down there, they move over there, and I realized, well, you got a little notification telling you what's happened. Also, I realized that was a terrible idea. I don't want them in there, so I press U, undoes it. That goes back to the right place. Press Enter. Other things, I'm going to pop like flyby. So these are some of our tutorials. You know, I'm going to actually, Brian's worked primarily on those with some of our other contributors. I'm going to stick to areas of work that I know very well. One of which is something I've been working on for a little while, which is our VCS integration. So this is integration with Git. We've actually got a provider, so you can implement more than just Git if anyone's using like Subversion or anything. But as an example, so here's my yarn lock, which has changed. I decide I want to commit that. So I go out there, I decide to commit that. And let's just go to terminal just to show that that is actually, so if we do that, and we go to a terminal, and we go to Oni. If we look at that, that's actually just modified that. And what we're going to do there is we're going to go back, and we're going to say, actually, I don't want that. Let's not commit that. Actually, there's nothing useful there. That's actually gone away. If you wanted, you could actually commit that or go all the way through. I've added on-commit functionality as well. We've tried to make sure that everything works the Vim way, which is to say sensible, actually just emulating Vim bindings where possible. So for example, I don't know if it was clear, in the file explorer, that's all J, enters there. This is yanking. You can do multi-yank, which is all Y, then undo with that. Other things maybe to show. Some of our autocomplete functionality. If I go back to the file I was in, we can go this ._Neovim. So this is how we actually interact with Neovim. So it's a bit of a mixed experience there. We go add listener. So if Neovim's got like auto commands, we can do auto commands dot, say we can do buffer delete or buff enter. So this is kind of how we interact with it. It tells us when buff enter is happening. We can execute some JavaScript function on the basis of that, some TypeScript function, potato, really. And you've got your completion for that there. yeah, that's kind of like part of my ad hoc demo. Sorry, I didn't go that well earlier. Oh, another thing which I should probably mention is we added this functionality recently, which is called sneak mode. Especially because parts of it are now GUI elements that are sort of separate. We wanted to have them be as accessible as sort of other Vim things. So you can actually just change file by going AH, or you can go wherever else you need to go based on using sneak mode, which we implemented. Perhaps if I still have time, I can show you really quickly opening a browser in a vertical split. So there you go. You've got DuckDuckGo, and then I go DP, so Vim, and then we go only Vim website. Okay, if this doesn't work, that's DuckDuckGo, that's not me. There we go. All right, and then we open our website. So yeah, go have a look. Please check it out, and let us know what you think. We're kind of a little bit slow to respond to stuff now because we're currently prototyping V2, so, well, plus work and life. But yeah, let us know what you think in comments and issues. That's me. Okay.
We actually have a couple more minutes to ask questions if he can accept.
I'm happy to if anyone's got one.
何か質問があれば、日本語も大丈夫です。こっち。
What do you wish for Neovim to implement new feature? So what new feature you wish for them to implement? If there is.
Oh no, there's a lot. See, for me, that question is too big as opposed to too small. They've got a lot of really, really cool stuff on their backlog that they're working through, and they kind of interact with us a bit, so we kind of plan a little bit around that. Some of the cool stuff, I think, which is on the sort of backlog, is stuff like externalizing more functionality. So to explain, we can render things that they give us control of. So the status bar, they can tell us what's going on with that, or the command line, we can actually render that externally as well. Messages. So whenever they externalize something, it gives us an API so we can choose how to render it. So yeah, I'd be quite keen to see them externalize more stuff. They're also looking at syntax highlighting, better one in Vim. There's a really cool library that someone's built. It's a C library that does like very clever parsing and syntax highlighting, and they've been dabbling with integrating that. We were going to try and do that as well. So if they do it first, that'd be cool. So yeah, that's kind of stuff.
Thank you.
So about that browser functionality,
Yeah.
do all of the Vim features work inside text boxes inside the browser?
Do all of the Vim features work inside of the browser?
In the text boxes inside the browser. So say if I want to post a long blog post or a long answer on Stack Exchange or something, could I use?
Could you use the editor to do it just the same?
Yes.
At the moment, you'd have to we've implemented some functionality, not all. Yeah. But I guess the thing that's cool about this, to me anyway, is the only reason that that's not done yet is just time. Like there's no limitation to doing that. I personally haven't had the time or thought about it really. So that's a good point.
That would be a really awesome feature, I think.
I mean, yeah. I mean, we do that with our input, so we could possibly do something similar. But then that's like, okay, I'm already kind of running down that road.
Thank you.
No worries.